January 2026. Reuters says Finland seizes ship sailing from Russia after suspected cable sabotage in Baltic Sea. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex, joining with Arya in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today, we are going deep into the Baltic Sea, where a shadow war is, it's escalating far beneath the waves.
It really is. We've been tracking this pattern for a while now. Critical infrastructure, we're talking power lines,
Yeah.
fiber optic cables, they're being severed again and again. And this isn't just, accidental damage. Senior European officials are calling it hybrid aggression.
And today we break down what might be the definitive moment, the latest seizure by Finnish authorities, where they seem to have caught a vessel red-handed, dragging its anchor. We're going to connect the dots between this incident and, at least 3 other major events that look less and less like accidents and more like, coordinated strikes on Europe's digital lifeline.
And crucially, we have to talk about the legal battle, the monumental struggle that NATO and Europe are facing, trying to stop this without completely undermining international maritime law.
So let's start with that breaking news, because this is the closest Europe has come to catching a vessel, in the act. New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2025. Finnish authorities seized the cargo vessel Fitberg.
Right, in the Gulf of Finland. And the Fitberg is suspected of damaging 2 really crucial undersea telecom cables, the ones that run between Helsinki and Tallinn.
So connecting Finland and Estonia?
Exactly. One belongs to Finland's Elisa, the other to Sweden's Line. These are vital arteries for connectivity between 2 key NATO allies.
What's so different about this seizure is the evidence. They seem to have it in real time.
Yeah, that's the key. The vessel was flagged in St. Vincent and Grenadines, but it was coming directly from St. Petersburg, Russia.
On its way to Haifa, Israel. And Finnish forces actually observed it dragging its anchor chain in the sea.
And this was happening inside Finland's exclusive economic zone, the EEZ.
We should probably clarify what an EEZ is. It's not quite a country's sovereign territory, right?
Not exactly. It's a zone that extends 200 nautical miles from the coast. The coastal state has special rights over resources, but, and this is the crucial part, it doesn't have full sovereignty like it does in its territorial waters.
The response here was immediate.
Oh, it was traumatic. Finnish special forces and the Coast Guard, they boarded and detained the ship, seized the whole 14-member crew.
And that crew is, it's diverse. We've got citizens from Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan. They're now facing some really serious charges.
Very serious. Aggravated criminal damage, attempted aggravated criminal damage, and aggravated interference with telecommunications. This is a major legal escalation from Finland.
It is, but you have to put this in context, right? Because cables get cut accidentally all the time.
They do. All over the world, maybe 100 to 150 times a year. Usually it's, fishing trawlers, anchors dropped in the wrong place. But the Baltic Sea has become a real anomaly.
An anomaly?
Since 2023, officials have documented at least 10 major incidents just in that one sea.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to ask.
When does it stop being a coincidence?
Precisely. And that's why you have Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, openly using words like sabotage and hybrid aggression. The official patience for the accent theory is it's run out.
What's interesting, too, is the fight over what to even call it.
Right. Most of Europe calls it hybrid aggression, something designed to stay just below the threshold of open war. But Estonia's top spy publicly rejected that.
What did they say?
They basically said, look, if it's state-sponsored sabotage, let's call it what it is, maybe even state-sponsored terrorism. So you can see, even as they're trying to figure out a legal response, they can't even agree on the political definition of the threat.
So let's connect those dots then, because the Fitberg isn't an isolated case. It's just the latest in a pattern. I'm thinking of the Chinese vessel, the Yipeng 3, back in November 2024.
Yes, the Yipeng 3, a bulk carrier, and again, it had just departed a Russian port. It was loaded with fertilizer.
And investigators zeroed in on it after allegedly damaged 2 key cables, one between Sweden and Lithuania.
And maybe the most critical one, the Sea Line 1. That is the only direct fiber optic link between Finland and Germany. A single point of failure, essentially.
The evidence here came from its own tracking data, right? The AIS.
That's right, the Automatic Identification System. Every ship has to have one. And its data suggested the ship dragged its massive anchor for, over 100 nautical miles?
100 miles, while moving at 7 knots.
I mean, that is just It's almost impossible to explain away as negligence.
Mm.
Naval experts, even NATO commanders like Keith Blount, they've said dragging an anchor that far is just stupid.
Stupid in the sense that a competent crew has to know it's happening.
Of course. You would feel the tension on the chain, the drop in speed, the stress on the hull. You would have to be ignoring it on purpose or be, criminally negligent.
But the legal aftermath of that specific incident, it just shows the massive hurdle here. Western intelligence had strong suspicions the Chinese captain was, let's say, influenced by Russian intelligence.
But trying to prove that is another story. When investigators tried to get access to the ship, they just hit a diplomatic wall.
China blocked them?
Initially, yes. They eventually allowed a really limited inspection under Chinese supervision, and then the ship was gone. The data trail was damning, but the ability to gather actual prosecutable evidence, it just vanished.
And then, just a month after that, December 2024, it happens again with the Eagle S.
The Eagle S, a Cook Islands flagged oil tanker. And this one was suspected of being part of Russia's shadow fleet.
We should probably pause on that. What exactly is the shadow fleet?
It's essentially a fleet of aging, often uninsured vessels. They operate under these opaque ownership structures and flags of convenience. The whole point is to circumvent Western sanctions related to the war in Ukraine. They're the perfect tool for deniable operations like this.
So the Eagle S fits that profile, and it dragged its anchor for 66 miles on Christmas Day.
Taking out the S-Link 2 power cable and 4 separate data cables in the process.
That time, the Finns responded even more forcefully.
Oh, absolutely. Special forces boarded the tanker from a helicopter. It was an incredible show of force, clearly designed to send a message. They stopped it just before it could sever a 6th cable.
But even with that dramatic intervention, the court case fell apart.
It did. And this part is just devastatingly instructive. In mid-2025, a Helsinki court just dismissed the case. The reason? A lack of jurisdiction.
Lack of jurisdiction. The ship was destroying Finnish infrastructure in their own EEZ. How is that possible?
And you've just hit the absolute core of the problem. It all goes back to the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS.
The International Rulebook for the Oceans.
Exactly. And its entire philosophy is built around protecting the freedom of navigation.
So even if a Finnish patrol sees a ship wrecking its own cables in its own economic zone, they can't just board it.
Not without permission from the vessel's flag state. That's the rule.
Yes.
And as we saw with the Yipeng 3, if the flag state, China in that case, or some tiny nation offering flags of convenience, if they refuse or just delay, the ship is basically in a safe harbor.
So the law was built for accidents, not for sabotage.
Precisely. It was built to manage commercial disputes between legitimate actors, not to combat a state using a proxy vessel with plausible deniability.
It sounds like prosecutors have an impossible job then. They have to prove intent, which is already incredibly messy.
It's the weakest point in the whole chain. We saw it again with a Swedish investigation into another ship, the Vizen, in January 2025. They looked into a cable break, but eventually closed the case.
Why?
They decided it was an accident, poor equipment, bad weather. Once you introduce mechanical failure as a possibility, proving malicious intent beyond a reasonable doubt becomes exponentially harder.
And then you have the whole political mess left over from the Nord Stream explosions in 2022.
Right. A Polish court recently refused to extradite a Ukrainian diver who was a suspect, and their argument was that destroying the pipeline could potentially be seen as a legitimate wartime act against an aggressor.
So that just fractures the whole legal picture. What's a crime versus what's an act of war?
It leaves Western prosecutors scrambling. The old tools just don't work against these new hybrid threats.
Okay, so if the legal framework is the weak link, what are NATO and the EU actually doing about it? How are they defending this infrastructure right now?
They realized they couldn't just wait for the law to change. So the response has been on multiple fronts. First, military deterrence. In January 2025, NATO launched Baltic Sentry.
What's that?
It's a huge, very visible operation. More ships, frigates, patrol aircraft, satellites, even naval drones. All of them are specifically tasked with watching over this critical undersea infrastructure, or CUI.
And it seems to be working, at least partially. There was a lull in major incidents between when it launched and this recent Fitberg seizure.
I think it's definitely had a deterrent effect. It makes it harder, riskier for these actors. The second front is technological. The UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force activated an AI program called Nordic Warden.
An AI program? Why not just have more people watching the screens?
Because it's an impossible task for a human. You're trying to track hundreds of these shadow fleet ships. Many of them deliberately turn their AIS transponders off and on to hide what they're doing.
To go dark.
Exactly. Nordic Warden analyzes all that data, even the intermittent signals, and it calculates a risk profile for each vessel. It flags suspicious behavior automatically. It's about finding the needle in the haystack.
So AI to expose them. But what about the legal problem? How do you fix that UNCLOS rule that gives them immunity in the EEZ?
Well, legal experts are proposing a clever workaround, using UNCLOS against itself, specifically Article 60.
Go on.
They're suggesting that Baltic states should pass new national laws that formally define undersea cables as installations.
An installation like an oil rig.
Exactly. And under Article 60, countries can establish safety zones around installations. And in those zones, activities like anchoring can be strictly prohibited.
Ah, I see where this is going. So if a ship enters that safety zone and drops anchor.
Then the coastal state suddenly has the jurisdiction it needs to board and inspect the vessel without asking the flag state for permission.
Has anyone done this before?
Oh yeah. Denmark, Australia, New Zealand, they already have similar laws on the books. And to make it even stronger, experts are suggesting they should also apply a strict liability standard.
Strict liability.
And this is a big shift, reverse the burden of proof.
So what does that mean in this context?
It means if your vessel's in a safety zone and a cable gets damaged, the responsibility is on you, the ship's captain, to prove it was an accident. The state doesn't have to prove you did it on purpose anymore.
That's a huge legal shift. It puts all the pressure on the vessel's crew.
It imposes an immediate cost and a powerful deterrent.
But will that be enough? I mean, if these are just aging tankers owned by shell companies, is a fine or charging the captain really going to stop a state actor?
That's where the economic tools come in. The EU is looking beyond just fines. They're exploring changing their anti-Russian sanctions into what they call an actor-agnostic framework.
Meaning it doesn't matter who is behind it.
Exactly. The goal is to impose heavy economic costs on anyone involved in this kind of hybrid interference.
So you could sanction the vessel owners, the flag states that enable them?
Even the port states that let them dock.
Yeah.
You target the entire economic network that makes the shadow fleet model possible, not just the guy at the helm.
So if we pull back and look at the big picture, Europe's networks have so far been pretty resilient. The lights have stayed on, the internet has kept working.
Right, because there's a lot of redundancy built in. That's the ultimate defense. But the vulnerability that's been exposed here, it isn't really the physical cables.
It's the law.
It's the massive gap in international maritime law, in UNCLOS. When it's faced with these deniable hybrid threats, it's forcing Europe and NATO to get very creative legally and technologically, just to defend the basic rules-based order these cables represent.
And it's sobering to think about what's at stake. This is the invisible economy. It's carrying 95% of global internet traffic, something like $10 trillion in financial transactions every single day.
It's the infrastructure our entire modern world is built on.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If this critical undersea infrastructure is this vulnerable and these vessels can keep escaping real consequences because of legal loopholes, what unseen infrastructure closer to your home, maybe water lines, gas pipelines, local data centers, might be the next target if the cost of playing these games stays this low? You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Oria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.